His head kicked in, caved in to the point where they had to remove his skull, and the rest of us taxpayers got to foot the bill to keep him on life support for the 18 months after which he lived until he passed away while he was in a vegetative coma. I've never seen anything like the Department of Corrections.
State Senator Chapin Rose, the final day of fall veto session, just as they were debating and approving the director of the Illinois Department of Corrections. Good morning. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. You can wake up with us each and every weekday morning here with the Center Square. You can get headlines in your inbox. Go to thecentersquare.com and sign up for the newsletter. So fall veto session, tons happened. Obviously, we've talked about yesterday, for instance, them expanding the state's migrant sanctuary policies and the concerns that law enforcement have about that, leading to possible private rights of action or private lawsuits against law enforcement and certain types of facilities like hospitals, daycares, and universities. You also have the Transit's fiscal cliff bailout that's passed, allowing for the RTA to increase taxes in the Regional Transit Authority jurisdiction, but also sweeping road fund interest and putting that towards the hundreds of millions of dollars in the Regional Transit Authority's fiscal cliff. Plus, you've got the energy bill that passed that Republicans say is going to tack on $8 billion to utility payers' bills. And obviously, all of that happening in the final hours of fall veto session. The one thing that also happened was LaToya Hughes getting paid more than $200,000 by the taxpayers annually, be the director of the Illinois Department of Corrections. She's been appointed several times by Governor J.B. Pritzker, and appointees have, I believe, 60 session days before the appointment has to be either thumbed up or thumbed down. And when that 60-day legislative day calendar comes up, the governor has a history of removing appointments and then reappointing them to restart that clock. So you have LaToya Hughes in that capacity as acting director of the Illinois Department of Corrections for more than 2 years. And it was time, I guess, during veto session to go ahead and bring that appointment up. And you have State Senator Terry Bryant talking about how they just could not get info from the director as an acting director on things like the number of deaths of inmates in Illinois prisons. And again, this is from the final day of fall veto session last week.
In the FOIA, they refused as well. I had to appeal to the Attorney General's office, at which time the Attorney General's office ordered them to give me documents. In those documents, just as an example of the things that I found, there were 9 inmate deaths in just 24 and 1 month of 25. And because I wanted to be able to talk to you all about what's happening and actually prove it, I asked only for fentanyl information. Those 9 deaths were fentanyl of offenders. We're not even talking about the staff that gets exposed. The buck has to stop somewhere, and the buck stops with the director of the Department of Corrections on all of these issues.
Now, one of the things that's been discussed to try to stop the flow of illicit substances is mail scanning. And Tuesday, there was a hearing of all kinds of interested parties, the Department of Corrections, to discuss the emergency rules they have in place concerning mail scanning so that they're not getting physical, the original artifact of a handwritten letter from a loved one. That's getting scanned and then sent via a tablet. We've been hearing this in discussions with the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, with emergency rules the Department of Corrections has, but it's been slow to be implemented and not necessarily across the board. And there's been questions about who the contractor is for the tablets and so on. But you had, as the appointment of LaToya Hughes, the director of the Department of Corrections, State Senator Chapin Rose said that she's not managed the agency well and things are troublesome on the ground. He says that he and others took tours of a prison and, they came across some things that were concerning.
You want to know how drugs are getting into the facilities? You want to know how all of this stuff is happening? It's happening because no one is watching what's going on. I didn't
obviously, this is Terry Bryant, not Senator Rose. We'll get to his comment in a moment.
Focus all of my attention on trying to find out what's happening with staff, because I think that there are some people who kind of brush that off just a little bit. But I'm telling everyone in here, under LaToya Hughes' leadership, the offenders that are in the Department of Corrections are dying. and they're dying every day. If you vote for LaToya Hughes to be confirmed as the director of the Department of Corrections, you are voting for her leadership to continue in the way that she has been conducting that. I have no personal animus towards her. I believe she could do very well at a different agency, but this is not the agency that she should be managing. I respectfully ask each of you to take that into consideration if you care about those people who work there and if you care about those who are incarcerated.
Bryant, being a former corrections employee for, I think, like 20 some odd years, she's vested in the clear operations of the agency. It says that they're not being transparent and they've got serious concerns about staff safety and inmate safety. To Senator Chapin Rose, again, having taken a tour with other legislators, found some troubling things.
Ward, and you could smell the smoke. No, nothing to see here. There's really nothing to smell here, except it was right there. Talked to one of the guards on the side outside of the earshot of the wardens and his higher ups. He tells you wait till nightfall and it's purple haze. Direct quote. No, I'm sorry. Purple haze, something out of Thunderdome. That was the actual quote. Now let's talk about last week, the inmate who was life flighted out of Robinson, which is, by the way, is medium security for an overdose. Life flighted. But then when the men and women who work there get accidental exposures, they're told, no big deal, you're making it all up. And they get driven home, not to the hospital, they get driven home in personal vehicles. For all of you who care about inmates, how about the one who died last year in Lawrenceville from a fentanyl exposure? How about the 18-year-old kid that went in and came out with literally his head kicked in, caved in, to the point where they had to remove his skull, and the rest of us taxpayers got to foot the bill to keep him on life support for the 18 months after which he lived until he passed away while he was in a vegetative coma. I've never seen anything like the Department of Corrections.
A lot of criticism for the Department of Corrections, including from Republican State Senator Jason Plummer.
Last time the acting director appeared before the Executive Appointments Committee, and I asked her how many inmates have died under her care in the last year, she couldn't provide a number. When I asked how many died in the last month, we couldn't get a number. Those numbers are directly reported to the director. You would think if you're in a position of that magnitude, you could tell us how many people have died in your care and your custody. It's embarrassing, tragic, and immoral, the number of people who are serving their sentences in the state of Illinois that are being harmed and being killed. It's embarrassing and immoral how many corrections officers go to work every day, leave their families, and are traumatized and harmed. When the Department of Corrections and the leadership of the Department of Corrections tells us after an exposure at Graham Correctional Center outside Hillsborough, Illinois, that Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans who are serving as Department of Corrections staff are knocked on their backs and rushed to the hospital in severe stress because they were exposed to saline solution and baby powder, that math just doesn't add up. And we're told baby powder and saline solution, baby powder and saline solution. And then 2 years later, she testifies that it was exposure to illicit contraband that was in the system. She lied. Contraband is all over the system. People are being harmed. Drugs are all over the system.
Plummer went on to urge senators to vote no. And despite the criticism, despite the opposition, Hughes was appointed and approved in the Senate on the final day of fall veto session. So that was last week, right? Thursday was the final day, but of course they spilled into the way early hours of the Friday morning on Halloween. But yesterday, the Department of Corrections held a public hearing about that mail scanning system that they have in place as an emergency rule, and they're trying to get their rules together before January when the emergency rule deadline ends. And of course, the mail scanning is in response to the illicit substances getting into into the system, the prison system, through mail. Say a loved one sends you a letter, but it's laced with some kind of illicit substance, and you're able to roll that up and smoke it or ingest it somehow. And then you all of a sudden have staff coming into a situation where they're surrounded by this illicit substance like smoke, like we've heard. So you've got problems there. So an attorney for the Department of Corrections laid out a bit more about the rules process during this public hearing yesterday.
As represented to JCAR, we will follow the law when it comes to the emergency rulemaking, that Procedure Act, and the limits of emergency rulemaking. But that being said, I believe during that same hearing, we also made representations that we are doing our levels at best to pursue permanent rulemaking, which this is, of course, part of that process.
Right. So in the event of a gap, what happens?
I don't want to be over my skis, but I would say is the department, of course, we've putting together measures if necessary to prepare for such, but as it was stated during that hearing, the department is pushing forward to make sure that we can get the permanent rule across the finish line.
So are they going to be able to do that, though, to get that permanent rule across the finish line? You had representatives from the prison staff there, a president of an AFSCME local union saying that they've got concerns and they feel that the mail scanning is helping with keeping things safer, again, not just for the inmates, but for the staff.
As a union president, I can share that members are relieved that mail scan is implemented. The haze and the smoke present in the housing units has already been reduced substantially. It is a relief to not leave work with a headache every day. Since scanning the mail, we have gone an entire week with no incidents involving intoxicated individuals. I think it's been 2 years, to my knowledge, that we've been able to go that long with no meeting on this. No drug-related incidents. Mail scan is making things better for the staff and individuals housed at Lawrence Correctional Center.
So clearly that's some on-the-ground perspective about mail scanning where it has been put into place, leading to at least staff recognizing things are a bit safer. Here's a prison guard sharing his thoughts about mail scanning.
What's unique about Graham is it houses several special populations, including substance abuse treatment and individuals in custody in a kidney dialysis program. Graham also offers numerous academic and vocational programs. When I first started at Graham 12 years ago, it was relatively free of conflict. Incarcerated persons had relatively free movement, and for the most part, it was a calm environment. Assaults on staff were rare, and overdoses and exposures were also rare. Things have changed dramatically in recent years due to the increased presence of drugs, with mail being a known point of entry. Exposures to unknown substances and assaults increased and became regular occurrences. In one mass exposure, 22 employees were sent to hospitals for treatment, with several of them having to spend the night. Encounters with incarcerated individuals under the influence of substances became a daily occurrence. It's much more difficult to maintain order when individuals are intoxicated. They are confused, unpredictable, and can react violently. In my facility, the majority of assaults on staff involve drugs. Now that the mail scan has been implemented, incidents involving intoxicated individuals are down to 1 to 2 times a week rather than a daily occurrence. I have seen big improvements since mail scan started. I feel 100% that mail scan has made us safer, and I can see the morale is much better.
So there's obviously the proponents of this, the workers on the ground in Illinois prisons, sharing with a public hearing about the mail scanning rule that they're getting ready to finalize before the deadline to get that rule finalized. So we'll hear a lot more about this with the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. They meet monthly, and they are a bipartisan group of legislators overseeing the state agency rulemaking process. And you then had the advocates for criminal justice reforms at this public hearing yesterday, including the executive director of Restore Justice Illinois.
To digitize physical mail is to eliminate the art, beauty, and emotion, the texture, and even the scent that is unique to physical correspondence. Additionally, there is no evidence to support that the proposed permanent rules will be effective in stopping contraband from entering the IDOC. In some states, drug use and overdose have increased after implementation of mail scanning policies.
And he then provided some study from 2023, but again, that's an advocate for criminal justice opposing the mail scanning that the staff say that needs to be in place. You've got other individuals pushing back against the idea of mail scanning.
These amendments significantly restrict mail and publications for people incarcerated in Illinois. They were put forth without supporting data, and if implemented, they would create substantial new barriers to education. New restrictions on publications and barriers to education are particularly concerning considering the acute need to increase access to higher education in Illinois prisons.
I think you got these tablets now that inmates are given as part of this program. Can they not get material there? PDFs, websites and such, if they're getting further education in prison, and you have people saying, well, it's a letter from a loved one, the smell of the loved one might be on there, and the physical holding of the paper, knowing that it was something that that loved one had written on. These are the types of things that they're saying are going to be harmed by the mail being scanned and just a digital replica of that piece of mail coming through a tablet instead of physical connection with that piece of mail. The ACLU of Illinois also opposing the mail scanning, saying that this could impact prisoners' property rights. Here's Benjamin Riddell with the ACLU of Illinois.
Courts have recognized that people in prison have property interests in their personal property. The proposed rule potentially violates the property rights of incarcerated people and undermines rehabilitation by cutting people off from precious tangible items sent by family, friends, and loved ones, and potentially opens the state up to liability for depriving people of their property.
So what's going to happen? We'll obviously be watching. JCAR meets again soon. They'll have their meeting next month and the month after. Will this be on the docket? Guaranteed. So we'll be watching, and you can stay up to date. Go to thecentersquare.com, click on newsletter, and get the newsletter in your inbox each and every weekday morning. But you can also wake up with us here for Illinois in Focus live weekday mornings. Programming note, I am off all next week, beginning this Friday. So just wanted to get that out in front of you here. It is Illinois in Focus Daily.